Okay, remember that elite people who are basically white, Jewish, and LGBT supremacists are changing the sound of my voice for their stupid contrast game. And that's what this video is about. It's about the order of obvious deception from the most obvious, which is point number 5, to the least, which is point number 1. Now, you should know people by their fruit, right? Matthew 7. Micah 7, right? It says, now is the time for your confusion. It says, now is the time for your confusion. And it connects to Matthew 10, okay, where it talks about how it turns the mother and daughter against each other, and the father and the son, and the families are divided, and Christ came to bring a sword, which connects to Luke 12 or 13, where it says that Christ came to bring a fire, right? So that division is going to cook those who survive, and it says, that they're going to be assigned a place with the unbelievers, somewhere in Matthew. Okay. Now, obviously the righteous are as bold as the lion. There's a difference between being nice and being righteous. The word nice is a play on words for sin, right? The word sin, S-I-N, spelled backwards, is N-I-S. Okay, the reason why nice is spelled with a C-E instead of an S has to do with the word sin and their wordplay game. Okay, so at the bottom you have radicals. LGBT people in general, according to the Bible, will say to not break the rules on YouTube. Okay, they're said to be sinners, right? And it's very obvious to somebody whether they're a Christian or not based on the information they're given by different groups, including LGBT people themselves. You look at the gay parade, you look at the occult, the trannies in sports, the gender-neutral bathrooms, the child sex changes, and you look at the average, then the spectrum of the LGBT community, you know that the governing class is promoting it, as a way to kind of make a caste system or a class system. Okay, now I do believe that there should be an order in society. Not everyone's equal, right? The most righteous person is not equal to the least righteous person. I mean, who doesn't know that? For those of you who disagree, why do you think people are in jail or prison? Okay, why do people get locked up? If they're equal and everything's fair and everyone should be valued and treated the same way, why put people in prison? Pretty straightforward. So you have MAGA, right? They're obviously wrong. Cults are wrong. Radical religions, including churches who take a radical stance, and I'm sure you know who they are. The rich are obviously wrong. These young kids with their cultures, they're obviously wrong. College frats and everything else that fits in that category. Let's go up to the point number 4, right, going up the pyramid. Okay, so you have feminists, the American military, militaries all over the world, mental health, they're all obviously wrong. They're obviously controlled by the corporate class, and some feminists swear that they're not, but they are, because they're cheating me out of my right to lead. And that's the main goal of the governing class, is to get you to cheat the righteous, right? The Bible is about the righteous versus the wicked. And obviously God is God, and the source of the wicked is the devil. So all the Jewish stuff you see going on, pro-Israel, right? It's wrong to put one race above other races unfairly just because it's written in some book and it's interpreted by some people, right? It's one thing for a prophet to tell you directly, okay? It's another thing for you to trust a book and then trust your emotions and your sense of what makes sense, okay? Because the Jews in the story, for example, they had the same information that the prophets had, but the prophets had a certain insight into it because they were more moral than they are. So being given information is not how you understand God's plan. It's being in the divine moral order and being moral. So, again, all this pro-Israel stuff, the Jews in the news, entertainment, business, etc., the Freemasons, all that stuff is obvious. Again, this is the order of obvious deception from most to least, right? The devil is the deceiver. It's not just one form of deception. There's layers of deception. And as you get closer to the core deceivers, you can see who's doing it more and more. Point number 3, okay, is the regular churches, quote unquote regular churches, the English gentlemen, quote unquote, gentlemen that is, the quote unquote normal colleges. So these people present themselves as normal. As everyone's acting crazy and weird, logic alone would tell you, right? Logic, insight, wisdom, sense, that the main culprits are people who are trying to present themselves as normal to ideal. Not some poor homeless person who's an LGBT radical, not an LGBT radical from Oakland or some poor place in New York or Seattle. Okay, it's these people trying to present themselves as normal. Look at politicians themselves. Now, of course, they rig the deck, putting rich people out there like Elon Musk and Bezos. That's why they're in category 5, right? The most obvious of the deceptions. You see this rich guy acting like Ronald McDonald or something, Epstein, right? Weinstein, and you see Musk and Bezos are somewhat comparable to them. And these people who visit the Epstein Island, that's an obvious part of it. They know that if you commit to those guys and their past, that you've basically chosen to be evil in the most obvious way, kind of thing. Okay. So it should be obvious to you why, the pro-Israel stuff is very obviously wrong, and it's wrong to kind of support Israel and its genocide against, the Palestinians and all this stuff going. That's very obvious. Let's get to the next category. Point number 3. Oh no, we're there in the point number 3. Excuse me, I got a little thrown off by the fumes in the air here, but you can see that my arguments are sound, and I suggest you rally to me in person. Okay, point number. So obviously all these guys who say that the regular churches, the Englishmen who's like they're trying to be a gentleman in a nice restaurant, what have you, the normal colleges. We'll get to the Englishmen in point 1 here. We'll see. You'll see what I mean. Point number 2, or category 2. The most respectable churches and whites. So the most respectable, that is when you look at it trying to find your way in life. America's full of white and whitewashed people. So people are inclined to look for the most respectable groups of people if they're actually trying to kind of minimize the evil and the damage. And that's another snare. All these categories are snares and traps. And we said in Ezekiel 14, we said in various places in the Bible that God has set traps for people who aren't keeping the greatest commandment, which is to love God with all your heart, which means obeying God's commands in this chain of command. And that means obeying God through me. Right? Proverbs 24:21. Don't rebel against the king or God. And the king, which one? The one who's established the throne in righteousness. Proverbs 16:10-12. Okay, so that should be self-explanatory there. The most respect. So you see like the Catholic Church these days, right? The Pope is not that respectable seeming, but there's some priests and bishops that seem more respectable than others, and that's part of the ruse. And there's other church clergy and church groups and so-called Christian groups, So the most respectable churches in whites, and I'd go ahead and add in whitewashed people. Okay, and again, it's quote-unquote respectable. So the first category is a small group. It's a relatively small group of people who are nice and very polite. So as you look at these other groups, you're like, okay, those people seem to become close. And some people are trying to present themselves as like the pinnacle of sincerity, okay? And you have to make the distinction between them and me. I'm the top martial artist ever possible. What I'm saying is clear cut. What they're saying, you probably have a feeling that something's off, right? So say you see you're at a nice restaurant, you see a very polite person, he says, hey, I know how you feel, and he starts talking to you, right? You say, why is he talking to me? Why does he come off as a whitewashed person? If they're whitewashed, white culture, if they're in white culture, they're whitewashed, you can pretty much be sure that they're not sincere, okay? Because that's the main kind of thing that people are using to oppose God, right? They're saying to trust the propaganda of the state, the whitewashed churches, the neo-colonial movements, and so on and so forth. And there's no shortage in these frats and Freemasons. They're all white and whitewashed, right? These politicians, right? They're their suits and so they're white and whitewashed. These hippies who try to pretend they're different than the mainstream white to try to make it seem like they're ideal, right? They're, white and whitewashed. So be on the lookout first and foremost for the wolves in the sheep's clothes who are the most convincing, and they like to hack people's brains covertly, fume them and poison them. Sometimes you won't notice it, and you'll feel like, hey, this is not, what I would normally do, and you kind of keep going with it. That is commonly the effect that the mind control has. Thank you.